Same shirt, same hair, same spot. New day. Happy Wednesday. A former neighbor to where I live now, I loved these neighbors very much, and these were the neighbors that came over to the house to, for example, take care of Gabs when we were on our way to the hospital to have Soph. This neighbor has been very supportive of my content on TikTok, but I just wanted to mention something that she said to me. After a TikTok that I had done, my neighbor reached out privately just to comment on it to me, and she said that her husband had reminded her of a time that there was a parade in town, in my small town. And I don't know if we all walked up together as a group, my family, my neighbors, my mother and father-in-law, or if we just happened to see each other there. But my daughters love my neighbors. My neighbors were more involved in the lives of my daughters than my in-laws were, because in-laws, there could only be events and they don't want to really help in the daughters' lives. And so my daughter had chose to sit on the lap of my neighbor. My mother-in-law plucked her off of neighbor's lap and said, "You need to be on grandpa's lap." Happy St. Pat's. Despite my mother-in-law and father-in-law making it clear that events are where they wanted to see us, we still continued to invite them to our house every weekend. Not formally, but just would kind of be like, if you want to come down for the weekend, we would love to see you. In addition to just wanting low-key hangouts with them, events with two very young children were difficult, especially because events with my in-laws wouldn't have other kids at these events. It felt like we were just like being shown off, which hindsight, retrospect, is very clear. Now that I know that they were narcissists, that's what it is. You're here to be shown off. You're not here for me to bond with you. So we had a standing invitation with them every weekend to come down to our house. And they very rarely did. Me being the bitter bitch that I am, one time I decided to keep track in a year how many times they came to visit us. They came 8 times, 2 of which were with in-laws along. So the sister-in-laws came to visit, so they came down to do a big get-together. And if you're like, "Bethany, you big hypocrite, I thought you just totally went no contact with them." Well, hopefully you've been following me long enough to understand what was going on there. Something reared its head, though, as a difficulty when they would actually take us up on the invitations to visit. And that was that they wanted to have formal conversation. And what I mean by formal is that they wanted to have you sit down on the couch in the living room across from them so that you could have formal conversation. It wasn't just, we're all in the house together, there's kids calling around, you've got chores to do, we're all just kind of supporting each other and being in proximity. It was like you'd literally get, "All right, Bethy, come over here and, sit down." And it'd be like, what part of a 6-month-old and a 18-month-old don't you understand? Did I do my math right there? In other words, they were never bouncing my daughter on their lap, walking her around, playing with them. They were there to see Matt and barely see me. To the point that often I would be sitting alone at the table or doing all of the childcare or doing all of the diapers or doing the everything, while my husband, very clear picture of my husband, my mother-in-law, and my father-in-law just having formal conversation in my living room. It got difficult to the point that I told my husband, it's harder now to have them visit because I'm just left with the kids while they're here and you're all having formal conversation in the living room. On top of that, we're both full-time workers, and so the weekend is used for laundry, cleaning, things like that. And so I would be, and in addition to taking care of the kids, I'd maybe be folding a load of laundry, and my mother-in-law would say, "Oh, Bethy, you can save that for later. You can do that later. You can wipe those floors later. You can do that toilet later." And it's later when? I have to make supper and Two therapists on TikTok, one indirectly and one directly, have told me that there's a point where I need to get over my trauma and focus on healing. And I get that. Really, I do. I understand that one doesn't want to drag their feet through the grief forever, that I'm doing myself a disservice by doing so. But when I hear that, I hear get over it, which is no different than my abusers telling me that I'm overreacting, that I'm holding a grudge over abuse that was happening months or even weeks previously. On TikTok, I've been chronologically telling of the abuse that happened to me, particularly over a 2-year period, but also spanning back over the 16 years I've known my in-laws. And I've even touched on some realizations of my childhood. And maybe therapists hear things like, I've been emotionally neglected or invalidated since I was an infant. I was narcissistically abused by my in-laws for 16 years. And think, geez, get over it already. It's been 38 or 16 years respectively. But I vehemently disagree with that because for me, the realization has been in place for less than 6 months. For less than 6 6 months, I've been able to process things that have happened and allow other repressed memories to surface, and then I begin to process those. For 38 years, I've stuffed trauma down, I've repressed it, and all I got from that was codependency, chronic pain, and complex PTSD. I'm no therapist, but I take issue with therapists telling people to take away the power from the narcissist to focus instead on healing and rebuilding. I want to heal, I want to rebuild, but I need to grieve, I need to process, I need to be validated for the first time in 38 years. Let me be dramatic. Thank you. Hey, so I'd like to clarify a little bit more about the post that I did. I want to be clear, please don't go spamming this user. I'm not offended by it. I would just like to clarify. Yes, I agree that 8 times in 1 year is more than I have ever visited my family. So my Iowa family, I do not see them that much. I don't see them 8 times in a year. I've maybe gone down 5 times in a year, maybe actually less. And I understand that this is where TikTok makes it difficult or TikTok isn't the place necessarily that I should be sharing this story because it takes a ton of context. And maybe it's something that I haven't even made clear at some point. I've seen my family, again, probably 4 or 5 times max in a year in Iowa because they live 2.5 hours. However, in the case of my in-laws who live less than an hour away, they live in northwest Minneapolis, we live southwest of Minneapolis. In that case, they had very much been supportive of us moving close to them because they knew that of any of their children, my husband and I were the only ones who worked full time. They were very, we are going to help. We would love to be a blessing to you. Any avid follower who's listened to everything will recognize that my mother-in-law says things like that in emails and in texts. I want to be a blessing to you. Really talked about how much she would help when we had children. And what that post that I did was trying to convey was that's not what happened. We were told one thing and another happened. They weren't a blessing to us. They weren't a help. They wanted us to come see them at events. And when we kind of tried to counter that with, okay, let's compromise. We would love to see you, but we don't want it to be at events all the time. Could you come down and see us? And maybe you could help these full-time working parents of young children on the weekend. To answer another commenter, no, I wasn't necessarily asking for free labor. Man, you really spun that towards a negative component that seems a little extreme. I'd like to think that someday when my daughters have children and are very, very tired and are working full-time, that I will visit them, yes, to see them, yes, to have conversation, yes, to connect, but also to help them. Do you need a room painted? Do you need a load of laundry done? Can I clean your toilet and your sink? Let me sweep the floor for you. I really genuinely believe that I will do that and that I will enjoy doing it, knowing that I'm helping them. Another aspect of the help from my mother-in-law is that she gave people the idea that she was helping us, that she was a blessing to us. She would tell her friends what a blessing she was. I don't know if you remember a middle sister-in-law, when we first did start putting up boundaries, had talked about how I really think that this new difference between how often mom used to see you and now you're not letting her see you is a stark contrast. And it was like, that's the lie though. We don't see her. She doesn't come and help us. It's not a contrast at all. So this user had a thought that to allow her daughter time to sit formally on the couch with her, that she gets her daughter a nanny so that her daughter can get all the things done. And I don't need no knocking to anyone who has a nanny. I'm just trying to get across the fact that I didn't feel like I needed a nanny. I just felt like, I'm not to be a millennial on you here, but we know how to multitask. I can eat while I'm talking to you. We can clean. I can connect with you while we're cleaning. I can connect with you while we're taking care of my kids together. I can connect with you while I'm folding laundry. It doesn't have to be formally sitting on the couch. Why do we have to sit on the couch? Again, maybe muffins are done. It's multitasking. So this next post isn't necessarily about a narcissistic trait or personality. This is more just a trauma narrative. Again, when I say these things, they amazingly leave my mind. As I've talked about in past content, I did not trust my mother-in-law and father-in-law with my daughters. They had not shown me that they were selfless, that they cared, that they were aware enough to be aware of just even basic needs for my daughters. Again, to be clear, I'm not talking about will they read the right book, will they play the right toy, will they have the correct milk. That's not what it is at all. They had not shown me that basic needs and safety could be provided. However, I still wasn't strong enough at this point to necessarily say no and to stand up to them. And so I still allowed myself to be pulled into some situations where I wish I would have had the strength to speak up. We had kind of been giving excuses as to why my in-laws couldn't keep the girls alone overnight. There were a few times where they started asking to have the girls, specifically for an event, like mother-in-law's friends would be coming over for dinner the next day, so she of course wanted to have the doll to show off when the friends came. It was never just like an overnight event just for connecting. One of these occasions, mother-in-law had been asking to have my then 2-year-old at the time, my oldest daughter, who was at that point 2. We kind of kept giving reasons why, and finally Matt's dad called Matt and gave him, the runaround about how this is terrible that you won't let us keep them, and said something that has stuck with my husband his whole life from that point. He said, "You need to man up and let us see your girls." It's like, man up? How's that related? Anyway. So I can't remember why I was the one to drive Gabby up to Minneapolis to stay with Grandma and Grandpa. But it was me. I dropped Gabby off. I can't remember much else. All I do remember of that occurrence is before I even got back home, I was getting a FaceTime call from my mother-in-law. I pulled over to the side of the road to take it because in Minnesota we have cell phone laws. When the FaceTime image pulled up, it was of my 2-year-old Gabriella bawling. My mother-in-law's grating voice that still gives me shivers was saying, "Gabby fell. She fell off a chair. She fell off a chair when I was in the other room. Why were you in the other room? What were you doing in the other room?" It's very hard to not only not want your daughter to go, but then you haven't even made it home and she's bawling where she was going to be staying. The next day we did get Gabby back over a very difficult overnight for me to endure. And for the following week, she had a terrible bruise on the meat of her cheek. How do you fall so hard that you bruise the meat of your cheek? I don't. We continued to be the family that was close by for everything. So all events. So birthday events, major holidays, but even the minor holidays. So the Valentine's, the Easter, the Father's Day, the Mother's Day. It was us. We were the kids that were there that had to attend the events. Yes, we could have said no, except I didn't feel like we could. I didn't know yet what enmeshment was, and any time that I felt like I wanted to say no or kind of acted reluctant about it, not only would I get guilt from my mother-in-law, from my father-in-law, from my sister-in-laws, but since I had been raised to be a people pleaser and that you do these things, I felt a lot of inner guilt as well over, gosh, I'm a really crappy person that I just want to not do some of these things. I wasn't yet taking responsibility for and realizing that I could have boundaries. So again, trying to be clear that I'm not pinning all this on them. I could have said no. I didn't yet know that I had that power. So 2 things kind of led to me feeling like I could start to say no, or that I needed to start visiting this diaphanous world of boundaries that I didn't yet know existed. The first was that I started to feel like just resentful and bitter all the time of all of these occasions, these events that had to happen, while feeling like we weren't really benefiting. I started to think about, we would come away from an event and I would start to assess, like, did any of us get anything from that? I feel absolutely exhausted. I feel like all the energy has been sucked out of me. My husband kind of complained all the way home about the fact that we did have to go. He didn't have the guts to speak up and say that we didn't want to go, but he'd complain about it, which I'll talk about later is a different kind of difficulty, that he's always complaining and commiserating with me that he doesn't want to go, but then doesn't do anything about it. Anyway, won't tangent there for now. And the second was that I started to see the mask did start to slip into the people that they were. For now, I'm going to stick with the former, one of the reasons that I started wanting to speak up and do something about it is that resentment and bitterness. Since I feel a kinship with many of you who have followed and supported so far, I feel like, a kinship probably too with, I'm not the type of person who wants to be resentful. I'm sure some of the trolls, someone doesn't like that I use that term for dissenters, but anyway, I don't like being a bitter person. I don't like holding a grudge. I don't like feeling resent, contrary to someone else's potential belief. So I thought to myself, I probably need to man up, in my father-in-law's words, as far as figuring some self-reflection, some self-assessment on doing the hard things, the hard conversations, saying no. To this user, really, really interesting that you talk about the rough hairbrushing, because that immediately, I even commented to this commenter, oh my goodness, you just reminded me of something. I even brought it up to my husband last night, who said he immediately remembered what I'm about to tell you. So my mother-in-law, when we would occasionally get her to come down to visit, within 10 minutes, potentially within 5 of her being in the door, she would have my daughters seated on a couch, hairbrush in hand, and would roughly be hairbrushing them. And like major mom guilt, I'd see them uncomfortable, and there was a point where I did start to speak up and be like, she's fine, she doesn't need her hairbrush, but it took me longer than I'd like to admit. But the other thing about it was it would make me feel like, and I'm sure that's maybe how it was meant to be, was my daughters are so unkempt that one of the first things that you had to do the minute you walked into my house was make sure that their hair was brushed, because I am not a good enough mother.